and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Hi everybody, welcome to Gay USA. I'm Ann Northrup, this is not Andy Hum.
No, I'm Chris Cooper, I'm filling in for Andy this week.
Andy's away, and I have a cold, so I look miserable, I feel miserable, I sound miserable, but there's news to be delivered, so I'm here. I hope not to infect Chris, that's why I'm going to keep a little distance, and we will proceed.
First, we have to mention the big news item of the week, which is old news now, but still I think very much in everyone's mind, which is the murder of the kids and the teachers and principal in Newtown, Connecticut. And that sort of obviously became the major dominant news story. As we mourn their deaths, we also have to face the usual nonsense from various religious crazies who say we're responsible.
Well, I'll tell you a little about that. It looks like the Defense Department budget bill that we've been following will include a watered-down, fairly meaningless protection for homophobes in the military.
Senator-elect Tammy Baldwin gets some good committee assignments for when she finally takes office.
Speaker Bomer, while he is in the midst of his fiscal cliff negotiations, has found time to give extra money to Paul Clement and the BLAG people to defend the Defense of Marriage Act.
In Illinois, things are accelerating rapidly in terms of their attempt to get same-sex marriage passed for their state.
Also, in Rhode Island, we can look forward to a marriage vote there next year, I think.
Montana couple has rejected... Montana court has rejected equal benefits for same-sex couples.
In international news, we have some bad news from Cameroon and from Brazil.
We have good news from Scotland, Russia, Uganda, and Costa Rica.
And we'll mourn the death of my friend and leading AIDS activist Spencer Cox.
And I'll have a review of a documentary about the gay hero Alan Turing, who helped crack the Nazi Enigma code and actually was the father of the computer in many respects.
Absolutely. But we would be remiss if we didn't start with Newtown, Connecticut. First of all, just horrible, 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 and so sad to see all those people killed for absolutely no reason, and just a tragedy on every end. But of course, what are some of the first things we hear? We hear that the Westboro Baptist Church is going to show up to picket the funerals with their God hates fags signs, blaming the deaths on the United States acceptance of homosexuality. Excuse me.
The only thing I think to be said about this is that Westboro Baptist Church will do anything to get their name in the news and to try to get a little attention, and that's why I'm even a little bit hesitant to talk about them. And
I'm not even. They were threatening to show up. I haven't, as we tape, I haven't seen anything of them actually being there, so I don't know whether they're following through on their threats. But there are a lot of right-wing pastors, from Pat Robertson to a guy in Texas to several others around the country, who have blamed this on the fact that you can teach about gay people in the schools, but God has been taken out of the schools. Now, this is offensive, nonsense, horrible, very hard to hear, and really sad that they would stoop to this level to justify this.
I think it's being perceived that way, though, broadly. I think most people are looking at this tragedy and saying these people are making a mockery of the whole idea of our religion by trying to layer this on to this event. The one news item I do want to point out about the whole Westboro aspect of this is that the hacktivists of Anonymous took Westboro's information, their email addresses, their home addresses, their personal phone numbers, Who knows how they got them, but they put them all on the web. They were, Anonymous was so enraged that Westboro was going to do this. So it's all out there, and who knows what repercussions that's having for Westboro. But I really think that's really all that needs to be said about Westboro in this context.
I agree. All right, let's move on to some other news. We have been following the fight over the Defense Department budget because our pal, Representative Todd Akin of Missouri, you may remember him, he has about 3 minutes left in the House of Representatives, and having lost his Senate bid against Claire McCaskill, he's going to disappear soon, which is lovely. Thank you, Missouri. But in his way out the door, he decided to propose something for the Defense Department budget that would protect people who are anti-gay in the military from any kind of punishment if they express their anti-gay views or discriminate against gay people or attack gay people or harass gay people. He also wanted to forbid any kind of ceremonies by same-sex couples on military grounds. Well, and the Senate version did not include any of this, but the House-passed version did. So now they're in their negotiations between the two versions. And I'm happy to say that it has all been watered down to something that I think is essentially meaningless, that says, you know, you can't punish someone for their beliefs. You can punish them for their actions, but you can't punish them for their beliefs. So.
Well, that's always been true. So
exactly,
yay!
Exactly.
That's fine with us.
Yeah, I think we've reached sanity on that one. Not so sane, however, is what's going on with John Boehner and BLAG, the Bipartisan Legal Advisory Group. You may remember that when the Obama administration announced it was no longer going to defend the Defense of Marriage Act in court, they wrote a letter to the House and the Congress and said, we will not be defending this. So if you want to defend it, it's up to you. So Boehner turned to the BLAG and said, all right, we want to hire you to do this. And they hired outside counsel, Paul Clement, or however it's pronounced.
Well, they had a limit on how much money they could spend on this defense, which was initially $500,000.
Exactly.
Okay. Then they were sort of bumping up against this limit because, you know, these lawyers are high-priced and charge a lot of money. So they upped it to $1.5 million. Well, that wasn't enough either. So now they've upped it yet again, and now the new maximum limit is up by another $500,000 to $2 million. So that is your tax dollars being put to use to fight your equal rights. Thank you, House Republicans.
This from House Republicans who are, you know, standing firm in we must cut Medicare, we must cut this, we must cut Social Security, we must cut that. But they're finding the money to pay lawyers to lose every damn case.
Well, what's interesting also about this is how they did it so quietly this time around. Because I think in the aftermath of the election where they got trounced and drubbed on all the social issues, they're trying to, you know, not appear to be quite so hard line on these social issue things, but still have to keep this going to satisfy their base.
I'm not sure they're backing down a bit. I don't think.
I don't think they're backing down. I think they're just doing it more quietly.
Okay. But they're still doing it. They took no lesson from the election, and frankly, they're not being held accountable. So, you know, they are getting reelected to a majority in the House, and so they are continuing to do what they're doing.
Well, while that's going on, I did want to, since I dutifully watch the show when I'm not here, I wanted to add an addendum to what Ann and Andy had been talking about last week. And bring sort of a personal spin, very personal for me because now I'm married. For a lot of you who might be watching this show and who are married, you know that there's a lot of repercussions in your taxes, federal benefits that affect you because you're in a same-sex relationship and DOMA doesn't allow the federal government to acknowledge that. Well, in terms of taxes, you can actually refile your taxes, amend your tax returns going back 3 years. So if there is some sort of resolution of DOMA in our favor, which we hope will happen by the ruling is expected in June of next year, you can actually go back and refile your taxes taxes and maybe file jointly, which you couldn't do before, which could
Right.
affect your whole outlook and your whole profile on taxes.
Complex, but possibly worth it.
But there's another
worth looking
aspect.
into. Yeah.
Even if it's more than 3 years, or if it's going to become more than 3 years, you can file what's called a protective claim for a refund. So let's say you got married in Canada way back when, or you got married in Massachusetts way back when, and you want to refile beyond that 3-year limit, you can file for a protective claim for a refund with the IRS. And what that does is say that even though that because there's pending litigation that may affect how I can do my taxes, I'm staking out this claim to be able to do taxes going back more, to amend taxes going back more than 3 years. So if you want to find out more about that, you can go to irs.gov, and it's a big site, but do a search for Publication 17. Get pen and paper, you'll want to write this down. Publication 17 on irs.gov. That publication is 300 pages long. It's a PDF. But if you go to page 20 of the PDF, that's page 18 of the document, they've got everything you need to know about this protective claim for a refund.
Isn't it nice to have someone who's doing the research for you and can point out these things? Thank you, Chris.
Anytime.
All right, back to the Senate. We're, of course, very excited that out lesbian Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin has been elected to the U.S. Senate. And we got some news this week about the committee assignment she's expected to get. Now, all of this has to be made official once the new Congress is sworn in. But it looks like she's going to be assigned to the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which covers ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. So that could be a great place for her to push that. It also covers schools legislation like safe schools things, anti-bullying legislation, all that kind of stuff. So.
And she's also going to be on the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, which is going to be dealing with the Domestic Partnership Benefits and Obligations Act, which is the law they're trying to push for those people who could not get married. Hopefully, if DOMA gets overturned, that'll be not moot, but less necessary. But we'll see.
Is that mostly federal employees, I think?
I'm not sure, actually.
Okay. She's also, it looks like, going to be assigned to the Special Committee on Aging and the Budget Committee.
And actually, yes, the Domestic Partnership Benefits and Obligations Act is about benefits for same-sex partners of federal employees.
We'll also be keeping our eye on a couple of new senators with the resignation of Jim DeMint from South Carolina. His replacement has now been announced, Representative Tim Scott, who is reputed to be an evangelical, a Tea Party member, anti-gay, a 0% rating from HRC.
As glad as I am to see another black person in the U.S. Senate, this isn't.
One at the moment.
This is not necessarily my first choice.
No. Although I will say that his reputation is that he's a nice guy. Now, whether you can define a nice guy as someone with an HRC rating of 0%, I don't know, but
I don't know. I would almost rather have someone who is not so nice but believes in our rights.
Yeah.
The niceness.
We've got a few of those.
Yeah, niceness means little to me. It's more a matter of getting the job done.
Now, we also, of course, this week lost Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, who was a real hero, Democrat. One of only 14 senators in 1996 to vote against the Defense of Marriage Act.
Yep.
I want to give you an idea of some of the people who voted for the Defense of Marriage Act. Joe Biden.
Chuck Schumer.
He voted in the House. He was there. Harry Reid voted for the Defense of Marriage Act. Patty Murray of Washington voted for the Defense of Marriage Act. Paul Wellstone, too, great liberal hero. But Daniel Inouye voted against it, one of only 14 senators. He always stood up for our rights, and he was a terrific guy.
Now, Hawaii has a Democratic governor. Will he be appointing the new senator?
Yes, but the rule is, even without that, that the senator must be appointed from the late senator's party. And it looks like they're going to appoint Representative Colleen Hanabusa, who supports DOMA repeal and has been a friend of the community. And when she was the head of the state senate in Hawaii, was instrumental in passage of the civil unions bill there. So I think she'll be a good person on our side.
And then the other thing we have to mention while we're reviewing the Senate makeup is that Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts is most likely going to be tapped to replace Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. So that means that another senator spot is going to open up, that one from Massachusetts.
Free for all. God knows what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
That's a little scary. But as we're mentioning people dying or retiring, we should also note the passing of Robert Bork, who almost made it to the Supreme Court under Ronald Reagan, and we sort of escaped by the skin of our teeth.
That was a bruising political fight that I remember vividly and still affects Supreme Court nominations to this day.
You should also watch out for former Nebraska Senator Chuck Hagel being appointed Defense Secretary. Andy Hum has a big piece on him in the current issue of Gay City News. You can look that up online. Chuck Hagel has a 0% HRC rating, although he did go from pro-war to anti-war. He's a Republican, so this is seen as, let's get a Republican in the cabinet. But he's running into trouble with the pro-Israeli lobby, and I noticed in the paper today, so maybe we can escape Chuck Hagel at
Politics is a minefield.
It is.
Are we ready for marriage news?
Sure, let's move on to that.
Well, first of all, the main thing is Illinois, which, Ann and Andy mentioned last week that the governor there had requested, Pat Quinn, is his name, had requested that marriage be taken up sooner than later. Well, it may be really soon, because now there's tremendous momentum building for bringing this up in the lame duck session, which is 2 weeks that begin right after the new year. And that would be, in my opinion, fantastic, because I think the quicker they get this done, the less time it gives for the opposition to mobilize. And the opposition is mobilizing. They've formed now a committee called the Coalition to Protect Children and Marriage. Right. And it consists of the Illinois Family Association, which is an SPLC certified hate group, Southern Poverty Law Center certified hate group, a bunch of other groups, Concerned Christian Americans, Catholic Citizens of Illinois, banding together to fight same-sex marriage in Illinois. So I think the sooner they get this rolling, the better. And they seem to think that they've got the numbers to get it done. Certainly in their Senate, which clearly leans in favor. The governor will sign it. It's a closer call in the House, the Illinois House, but both legislatures are controlled by Democrats.
Well, as you said earlier, I think those right-wing arguments are losing power.
We can hope.
Well, we saw them fail in the marriage votes in November.
Well, there's momentum too. I think those.
I hope my coughing is not too horrifying to people.
Coming on, I don't think it's horrifying. I think it's natural.
Okay. And on the other side, Orbitz is taking the lead in organizing corporations to support marriage equality in Illinois, and they're putting on quite a push on the grounds that business wants marriage equality because it allows them to keep employees where they want them, because otherwise gay employees leave the state because they want their rights.
Well, one of the wonderful things about watching this happen state by state, I mean, granted, would be better if it just happened nationally overnight, hold your breath for that. But as more states have same-sex marriage, it creates tremendous pressure on the states that don't, regardless of, the religious composition, to get it just to compete. Right. Because people just won't want to move to their state and they can't get the best employees. So as you said, this is a good thing for us.
Also in Illinois, we still have the lawsuit pending. I think it's about 6 couples who have filed for marriage rights in Illinois. And that actually is a very promising lawsuit, especially since all the state officials and county officials have refused to defend the prohibition on same-sex marriage. So I think one way or another, Illinois is looking pretty good.
Tying into what Ann said about Illinois or the arguments losing power, as we've seen in other states. There was an analysis by Frank Bruni in the New York Times, of Washington's vote. And he said, when you frame the argument as, give me my rights, it's a loser. People just don't respond to that. Even though you may have every right to say that, even though you are being denied and discriminated against, it's not an emotionally winning argument for the average voter. But when you frame it as, let me make this commitment, then overwhelmingly people sort of favor that vote. So that's a takeaway to have from Washington that we can maybe apply to other places like Illinois.
Well, it sort of plays out the reason people mostly get married in the first place, which is to make that commitment to each other. Now, certainly it has economic advantages, and people get pushed into it for various reasons, but mostly when two people stand up and say, I want to get married, and stand there in front of each other to say they're doing that, it's about an emotional commitment.
Of course.
So when we say that's what we want to do too, I think people can identify with that. All right, in Rhode Island, we've been fighting for marriage there for a few years. We have a head of the House of Representatives there, Gordon Fox, who is gay, who's been trying to push for marriage for a few years. But in the last year or two, he pushed a civil unions bill, which got everybody mad at him because they said, why aren't you pushing for marriage? But one of the roadblocks was the Democratic head of the state Senate, Teresa Pava Weed, who refused to support marriage, and she just was not going to let a marriage bill come up in the state Senate. Well, Teresa has now changed her mind, and she is on board with marriage. So she will allow a vote on marriage in the state Senate this coming year, and that is going to change everything in Rhode Island.
Well, Rhode Island right now is the only New England state that does not have same-sex marriage, though I believe they recognize same-sex marriages performed elsewhere. Yeah. I think one reason why Rhode Island is such a tough row to hoe is because it's got a very heavy Catholic Church influence in that state. And as we know, the Catholic Church does not support same-sex marriage, spending nearly $2 million in the last election cycle to prevent it. To no effect.
But Catholics support same-sex marriage.
Exactly. The leadership is against it. The Catholic leadership is against it, but Catholics actually favor it disproportionately compared to other religious denominations.
Now in Montana, the Supreme Court there ruled 4-3 in a suit brought by 6 same-sex couples that they were not entitled to equal benefits. But they said it was because their suit was too broad. They had challenged the state's entire statutory scheme, and they said what you have to do is you have to come back with an amended complaint for specific benefits. Now, the problem with that is that we've always said that one of the points of marriage beyond commitment is the 1,000+ benefits. So are they going to expect us to sue for every last one of those benefits?
Good Lord.
Yeah. Well, all I would say there is that the Massachusetts Gill case that we won against the Defense of Marriage Act, and in fact the Edie Windsor case, are predicated on specific benefits that we're asking for. And I think we're assuming, and it has been ruled, that once you bring that one attack on the Defense of Marriage Act, for instance, the Defense of Marriage Act as a whole gets struck down, so it then extrapolates to all the other benefits. So maybe this will turn out okay in Montana, but there was a furious dissent from the 3 people who said they should have decided the case in our favor, and they went ahead and pointed out some of the specific benefits: inheritance, taxes, health decisions, divorce, custody, etc. So it's an intermediate loss, but it's an open door to keep pursuing this. So I think things will continue to play out in Montana. And meanwhile, the City Commission of Helena, Montana, unanimously, I think, adopted a sexual orientation and gender identity and expression non-discrimination law.
I think they tried to strip out the gender identity part of the bill, and they wouldn't let it happen, and it passed anyway. So that's really good news.
Big, long, contentious public hearing, but we won.
Meanwhile, a couple of quick notes, other marriage notes. The very prestigious Williams Institute, which is part of UCLA, did a study on how the psychological distress is lower amongst gays and lesbians who marry than it is amongst those who are not legally married, and that mirrors sort of what you see in the straight population. And they also found that there was no significant difference between straight married couples and gay and lesbian married couples in terms of their emotional distress. And that's a finding that's going to be published in the American Journal of Public Health. So that's more ammunition for our side. Ironically, it's from a study that was done in California, of California residents where we had the right to marry, and it was taken away.
And that increased mental health has to do with societal approval. If you're in a relationship that has societal approval, you tend to be in mentally better shape than if you're seen as an outlaw. Although, why people are seen as outlaws these days, given the drastically falling rate of marriage in this country, is another question.
Another quick marriage note, a gay Marine proposed to his boyfriend at the White House.
Yes.
35-year-old active duty officer Ben Schock. His boyfriend is Ben Schock. The active duty officer is U.S. Marine Corps Captain Matthew Phelps.
Right. They were on a White House tour, which was a celebration of their first date, which had been a White House tour. Why your first date is a White House tour is another question.
They're patriotic.
Yeah, I get it. One of them's a Marine. And good news from the House of Representatives, where two Republicans, Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania and Richard Hanna of New York, have signed on as co-sponsors of the Uniting American Families Act, which is the proposed legislation to allow binational same-sex couples to have the same rights as binational heterosexual couples, to have the non-U.S. partner be recognized as a spouse for immigration or green card or whatever purposes. They are the first Republicans in the House to sign on. The only other Republican co-sponsor is Senator Susan Collins of Maine. So this is a big deal. This may break a logjam.
All right.
And we mentioned last week that Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court had been saying some nasty things about gay people in a speech at a college or something. Well, people, our attitude was sort of, yeah, what else is new? We've seen this from him before. We've read his decisions. We know what he thinks. But a lot of people are offended by this, and they're saying he ought to recuse himself in the Edie Windsor case and the Prop 8 case because he clearly has a bias against gay people.
Well, first of all, hats off to Princeton University freshman Duncan Hosey, who was the one who basically raised the question with Scalia when he was giving a speech at Princeton.
Yeah, Duncan Hosey, who was not yet out to his parents when he stood up and asked the question.
Good for you, Duncan. But I think the basis of Scalia's, or maybe a little bit of insight into Scalia's whole mindset, comes from the fact that he doesn't seem to think that gay people exist. He says there's homosexual behavior, but that there's no people who are gay. There's no...
look, he has a son who's a priest, a Catholic priest, who has been the chaplain to the Courage group in the Catholic Church.
Right, Courage being a group which seeks to, basically tells you the only way that you can deal with your homosexual orientation is to repress it for the rest of your life and live a chaste life. That's what Courage is about.
Yeah.
So...
Someone, is it the Huffington Post has published a list of the 50 best comings out of 2012?
I was saving that for later, but yeah, it was Toll Road actually that did it.
Toll Road.
Yeah.
And I have to say my favorite was Sally Ride, and that's why I brought this up, because NASA has just crashed a couple of little satellites into the moon, and they have named the crash site for Sally Ride.
Yes, that is fantastic. As someone said, you can now look up at the moon and know you're looking at a part of the moon that's named for Sally Ride.
Do you have a favorite on the list?
I had a bunch of favorites. There were maybe 8 that caught my eye. Actor Matt Bomer, who's like such a matinee idol to so many people, for him to be openly gay, I think is at the height of his career, is fantastic. Anderson Cooper, of course, champion boxer Orlando Cruz. I mean, a boxer.
Yes.
Unthinkable at one point.
Yeah.
Former NFL player Wade Davis.
Yeah.
Actress Christy McNichol. Singer Frank Ocean. And
Frank Ocean, I thought was big. I love Frank Ocean.
Just as big, Cloud Atlas and Matrix co-director Lana Wachowski, because transgendered people making this list is rare. And that's what I liked, is that it was a list, without even designing it to be that way, it was a list that included all sorts of races and ethnicities, all genders and transgendered, all occupations, all fields of endeavor. It was really a great list. So that's at tollroad.com if you want to take a look at that.
All right, let me use that as an excuse to digress and tell you a little about next week's show, which is going to be a special little holiday show. We have taken 3 chunks of videotape that we think are important for you to see that you'll enjoy, and we put them together into a show. And one is Lana Wachowski's speech to the Human Rights Campaign dinner in San Francisco this year, where she basically talked for the first time about being transgender, and it's a really interesting speech. So we're showing you all of that. We're also showing you a couple of minute clip put together by a group for the Campaign for Southern Equality, I think it's called. It's a bunch of activists in the southern states who are going to start pushing for marriage rights.
Wow. Wow.
Exactly. So, boy, are we impressed by them. So that's just a couple of minutes. And then, finally, about a 20-minute clip that is a report from Minnesota Public Radio covered by Stills, that is a real dissection of the Minnesota campaign against the constitutional amendment there that we won.
So in other words, it's in favor, on our side?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So it's how they did it, how they beat the constitutional amendment against same-sex marriage, which we had never done before. And it's a real blow-by-blow primer on how to do that. So we put that with the Campaign for Southern Equality to try to give them a little information on how to proceed. But it's a fascinating collection of material, and I urge you to watch next week's show to catch all that.
Fantastic. Can't wait.
All right, back to the news. In Orange County, Florida, which is Orlando, a huge county, the school board has adopted a sexual orientation, gender identity, non-discrimination policy over the vociferous objections of a lot of people who showed up at their public meeting.
In Michigan, anti-gay adoption bills that the Republicans had sponsored were allowed to die quietly in the dead of night, and everyone is really happy about that.
Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin has named out gay Mark Burstein as its next president. He's currently an executive vice president at Princeton. He was the chair of the Gay and Lesbian Victory Fund, and he will now be the president of Lawrence U. But at Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, which, as you can tell by its name, is a religious college, there are a bunch of LGBT students who have been asking for an LGBT group on campus, just, a support group. And they have been rejected by the university, and we have a local news report on that.
And some students at Point Loma Nazarene University are calling for change after a failed attempt to form a gay-themed student group. 10 News reporter Michael Chen reveals the high-profile voices that have joined the battle over religion and sexuality.
We are on campus, and this is a copy of that application to start a student group. The rejection of that application has sparked national attention. Sean Lewis, a senior at Point Loma Nazarene, is openly gay. He says he and others
I've received messages on Facebook
often feel unwelcome on campus,
warning me that I'm going to go to hell.
The school is associated with the Nazarene Church, an evangelical Christian denomination, to lessen the angst among gay students.
We just hope to create a safe space on campus.
Lewis recently spearheaded a campaign to begin a gay-themed discussion group. Here is a portion of the mission statement.
Can share their neglected stories, lingering questions.
Lewis applied for a charter for his group, but was recently called into a meeting and told by Kay Smith, Vice President of Student Development, there will be no group.
It would be problematic for us to charter any organization that would be contrary to the positions of the Church of the Nazarene.
Smith believes the group would be an advocacy group, which can't be sanctioned by the school. Lewis says the group would only advocate conversation and discussion.
We're not asking you to violate your belief system. We're just asking you to treat these students, these people, like people.
Backers of a group have started a petition drive that's drawn the support of national gay rights groups. Among those endorsing the petition, the Episcopal Church's first gay bishop.
Student organizers argue that this rejection will lead to a culture of fear and isolation. How do you respond to that?
I would absolutely reject that.
Smith says forums have been put on to discuss the topic of sexuality, and a student code says all should be treated with dignity. A dignity some say can't truly be achieved without recognition for a group. Michael Chen, 10 News.
Well, good luck to the students at Point Loma. We'll continue to follow that. Meanwhile, at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, there's been a controversy because a lesbian wife of one of the soldiers there applied for membership at the Fort Bragg Officers' Spouses group and was rejected on the grounds that she didn't have an ID card or something. So that's been going back and forth, but the Department of Defense says it's still conducting a review. The Fort Bragg leadership now says they will meet with Ashley Broadway, the wife, so that's a case to follow.
That's to meet about, just let her in. Meanwhile, there was a woman named Crystal Dixon who was at Toledo, University of Toledo. Or Toledo. I'm pronouncing it like it's a Spanish city.
Yeah.
University of Toledo, Ohio. She was the interim associate vice president for human resources, but she, in a Toledo newspaper, wrote an opinion piece where she basically said, oh, gays shouldn't say they're in a civil rights fight. I find that as a black woman offensive. Well, she got fired for that, and she appealed to the court system, and the federal court has now, Court of Appeals, has now upheld the fact that her firing was legal because they said, look, this directly affects your ability to do your job. Yeah, if you're a part of the Human Resources Department and you say, gay civil rights is a load of hooey, you're going to get fired.
Exactly. Update from Wayne Besson at Truth Wins Out. For years he's been following some of these ex-gay leaders, including John and Ann Paulk. They were sort of the poster children. I think they were on the cover of Newsweek
Weren't they the ones who were actually
gay?
Yeah, and running off on the side doing their thing?
Well, years ago, Wayne ran into John Paulk at a gay bar in Washington and took a picture of it.
And he went scurrying out in fear and terror?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but then their story was, it was just a lapse. Oh. Except that now they've moved to Portland, Oregon, and John has started a catering company, and all the waiters are hot gay men whom he has been sexually harassing. And he's gay, and he's pretty open about it now. So if you want more of the details of that, go to Truth Wins Out for the details. Times Square, Manhunt is putting up billboards in Times Square.
I saw the photo.
Wow, manhunt.net, all shirtless photos of hot guys.
Pretty steamy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some news that the right wing is going to jump all over, which is that the man who got married atop the Empire State Building as part of their long-running Valentine's Day tradition, they opened it up two same-sex couples when
Right.
same-sex marriage became illegal in New York State. His name is Sean Klein. Well, he was arrested on this past Monday for having child pornography or possessing an instance of child pornography. He got out on Tuesday, the charges were pending, and then he threw himself in front of a subway train.
Terrible.
And he is now in critical condition, and it's just a pretty horrible story all around.
Awful. And the race is on in the city council district in Manhattan to succeed Chris Quinn, Yetta Curlin, out lesbian, Corey Johnson, out gay, who you've seen sometimes sitting here as a guest co-host, are both formally announced as candidates for the seat, and God knows who else will show up too. This could be really painful.
Another bit of New York City news. Apparently, the district attorney's office is going to reopen the investigation into the death of transgendered activist Marsha P. Johnson.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
really and truly. I mean, it's a 20-year-old investigation, so I'm not sure
Yeah.
what they're going to hope to find. Her body was fished out of the Hudson, but she was a Stonewall veteran. And she was, apparently, I didn't know her, but she was apparently a great activist.
She was a great activist and a quirky person, but a terrific human being. And you can see a great documentary about her on YouTube. I think it's Pay It No Mind, the Marsha P. Johnson story, made by Randy Wicker, and it's really good, and you can get Marsha's story there.
And finally, New York, or as far as New York news goes, New York Mets pitcher Noah Syndergaard, who just got introduced as a Mets pitcher because he was part of a big trade with R.A. Dickey, who won the whatever. Don't ask me sports.
Cy Young Award.
Thank you, Cy Young Award. He made an anti-gay slur in a tweet. It was just stupid. He's 20 years old, and he put, "Oh, nice Crocs," and used the fag word, "nice Crocs fag." So he's apologized, and everybody can move on.
Let's all move on. International news.
All right.
All right. Well, let's start with the news, the good news. In Costa Rica, the president of Costa Rica has announced that she will advocate for unions between people of the same sex. I don't know if this will actually be marriage or more civil unions, but that's good news.
Further good news, possibly in my ancestral homeland of Trinidad and Tobago, which is where my mom is from and lives. The speaker of their parliament has decided, in a letter anyway, that she's going to try and rescind restrictions on gay people. For example, immigration. If you're openly gay, technically you're not allowed to enter the country. It's that bad down there. So she says she's going to fight for this. Whether it'll actually happen remains to be seen. It is a very homophobic society down there.
Yeah, I'm not going to get too carried away by this one, but Russia has postponed the first reading of the proposed national no promo homo bill, so maybe that's a good sign.
It's now due for consideration on January 22nd, but they did have a protest anyway, a scheduled kiss-in that was supposed to occur to coincide with the reading of the bill.
Big demo, people arrested on both sides, a fair amount of contentious violence back and forth. And the Uganda parliament has recessed till February, which means they have not yet again passed the Kill the Gays bill. However, in the interim, the Pope has blessed the speaker who is pushing this bill, and in his message of peace to the world, condemned same-sex marriage.
Can I just say, Santa doesn't like the Kill the Gays bill because Rebecca Kadaga, who's the Speaker of their parliament, had promised the Kill the Gays bill as a Christmas present to Uganda, and Santa didn't bring it. So.
Well, she didn't say which Christmas.
Oh, that's true. Meanwhile, American pastors are still down there lobbying for the bill. They make the claim that it no longer has any death penalty in it. That's very debatable. No one's quite sure what it says. It still has life imprisonment under certain circumstances, and pastors
it's a nightmare.
Pastors like David Dykes, who introduced, who did the prayer for Congress, are down there lobbying for the bill anyway.
In Scotland, they will introduce a marriage and civil partnership bill. It has a public comment period at the moment. and it allows all religions to do anything they want, unlike the bill in England, which forbids the Anglican Church to perform same-sex marriage.
So you may not be able to answer this, but I'm a little bit confused. I thought it was all one big United Kingdom, and I know that they're like states here. They have their independent...
You may be a Trinidadian and Tobagoan, or Tobogganish.
Tobagonian.
Scotland is my people, and they are very independent, and they have broken off recently, not completely, but they have they're independent enough that they can pass their own law.
So
like this.
David Cameron's bill would only affect England and Wales, and
I
Scotland
believe so.
is doing its own
yes,
thing.
Yes,
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
But to some extent, that's a guess.
Well, unfortunately, bad news in Cameroon, something really awful. A guy who texted, "I'm very much in love with you," to another man was sentenced to 3 years in prison for this. He appealed. The appeal was thrown out. He's going to have to go back to prison. The guy's name is Jean-Claude Roger Mbede. He's 32 years old, and his health is completely collapsing under prison conditions and the assaults he's suffering there. All for a single text to another man.
Yes, horrible. And in Brazil, a 20-year-old gay man was murdered by a teenager he propositioned, and the teen's accomplice, who said gays are vermin. And the guy was strangled with a seatbelt and robbed. A horrible story.
Good news from the Caribbean, which is rare. Tiny place called Saba, S-A-B-A, which is part of the Dutch Caribbean, has legalized same-sex marriage. That's a whopper in the Caribbean, which really is rife with a lot of homophobia. So it's a great thing. It may actually cause a little bit of domino effect with other Dutch Caribbean islands. So
well, they're sort of required to by the Netherlands because they're a Dutch territory, but they haven't been. They've sort of been ignoring that.
They've been giving certain Dutch islands are apparently more integral, and some have more independence. Saba is one of the integral ones. Even though the ones are integral, though, they've been holding back, and the Netherlands has been kind of giving them some leeway to adjust.
Right.
But Saba is taking the plunge, so if you're looking for a place to take your vacation, go to Saba.
Okay, and probably not Jamaica still, where we've been telling you about some very brave activists in Jamaica who have been trying to air TV commercials that are pro-gay. We showed you one a couple of months ago. Well, a Jamaican court has now announced that it will hear the challenge to 2 TV stations' refusal to air the pro-gay ads. So we thought we would show you the other pro-gay ad that the TV stations have refused to air.
Beautiful Jamaica, Emma. Just a rich culture, the diversity in people. That's what really makes Jamaica what it is.
You're right, Christine. But you know what? As a gay Jamaican, I believe,
As my brother,
we have the right to be.
unconditional love is our bond.
I love you, sis.
I love you too, bro. I'm so proud of you. And I'm very, very proud of my brother. His sexuality has nothing to do with how much I love him or how little I love him. You know, it has no play on it. Because at the end of the day, you love the person. Who cares what their sexuality is? That doesn't form who they are at the end of the day.
Seems easy enough. We'll see what the court says.
Real innocuous.
In Paris, we had told you they're fighting now over a bill to legalize same-sex marriage there. The right wing brought out a huge demonstration a couple of weeks ago, tens of thousands of people. This past week, out gay Mayor Bertrand Delano led a march of tens of thousands of people in favor of same-sex marriage. So the fight is continuing there in Paris.
AIDS news.
Yes.
Well, Anne, I'm going to let you talk about Spencer Cox because you actually knew him.
Spencer Squeaky Cox, as he was known, 44 years old, died of complications of HIV and AIDS, pneumonia, liver, neurological complications, cardiac arrests. 44 years old doesn't sound that young, but what you have to remember is that it was 25 years old 25 years ago that we started doing ACT UP. And when Spencer came to New York and got involved with ACT UP, he was literally 19 or 20. And he quickly became a very important person with the Treatment and Data Committee in ACT UP, which started doing all the really intense technical stuff about changing the drug approval process. He worked for AMFAR as an intern, and he was one of the people who started TAG, the Treatment Action Group. So he was part of that inner circle of Peter Staley and Mark Harrington and Greg Gonzalez and all these guys who really worked diligently on these drug approval issues, and he was really a great guy and important for all of that. He then, in later years, as people survived the epidemic, realized that there were emotional consequences to living through all this. And we actually had him on the show talking about his attempt to start something called the Medius Institute for Gay Men's Health, which was going to deal with emotional issues and post-traumatic stress and stuff that people went through. It didn't get off the ground, lack of funding, but it was a brilliant thing to try to do. He had problems taking meds about 10 years ago and had too many complications. There's some talk that he went off meds, and part of the reason he died was that he was not taking medications. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if he couldn't take them, wouldn't take them, whatever. But one of the things he said was that it's important to always hold on to the joy, always make this work fun, and that was certainly my experience in ACT UP. People say, especially people now seeing How to Survive a Plague, the movie that he's featured in, that we're going to show a little excerpt from, people say to me, thank you for doing that work. And I want to say, I did it because it was fun. Because it was a great group of people. It was where the action was. It was important. It was fascinating work. But we had a lot of fun doing it. So let's take a look at a couple of minutes of Spencer Cox.
There's a psychiatrist in San Francisco named Walter Dutz who was working with HIV-negative patients in the early 90s, and he wrote a marvelous book in 1995 called In the Shadow of the Epidemic, which concludes with him talking with his patients about this is not going to be something that's going to go away. You're going to be dealing with death and loss for your entire life, so let's make our choices accordingly. The very next year, protease inhibitors came along, and that ceased to be the truth. And what I learned from that is that miracles are possible. Miracles happen. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. I wouldn't trade that information for anything. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen day to day. I don't know what's going to happen next year. I just know you keep going. You keep evolving. You keep progressing. You keep hoping until you die, which is going to happen someday. You make your life as meaningful as you can make it. You live it. Don't be afraid of who's going to like you, or, are you being appropriate, or are you being... You worry about things like being kind. You worry about things like being generous. And if it's not about that, what the hell is it about? That's what I've learned. It worked. I told you.
Couldn't agree more, Spencer. There will be a memorial for him on January 20th from 3 to 6 p.m. at the Cutting Room on 44 East 32nd. We'll remind you of that in a couple of weeks. Spencer Cox, great guy, much missed. We also lost this week a guy named Josh Weston at 39, possibly also from AIDS complications, famous porn star, Falcon Studios and other video productions.
And then just one other health note. They've expanded the alert. You've probably been hearing on the show about the meningitis cases that the Department of Health has been warning about here in NYC. They have expanded it beyond just men with HIV to any men who have had intimate contact with another man in particular neighborhoods. So be aware of that.
Okay. Why don't you tell us about the Alan Turing movie in a few seconds, and then we're going to show you something great.
Sure. The Alan Turing movie is called Code Breaker. it had a lot of great information. The story itself is very compelling, so on that level it worked, but it had a mix of interviews and imagined reenactments, and that didn't quite work. So wait for the Leonardo DiCaprio biopic that's going to come out eventually.
Okay. But right now we're going to take you into Christmas by showing you something the London Gay Men's Chorus did in 2006 called Coming Out at Christmas. Very charming.
I intend to drop a bomb on my dear old dad and mom. For this year, without a doubt, is the Christmas I come out. First I'll get their full attention, then I'll drop a subtle mention.